For millions of years, the planet functioned without visible interruptions. The surface was occupied by life in constant motion, organized into repeated movements that required no adjustments. Large animals followed established routes, while smaller ones used the same spaces at different times. Air, water, and soil sustained this activity without disrupting its continuity. During that same period, a body was moving through space. It was not part of that environment and did not interact with it. Its trajectory was stable and did not depend on what was happening on the planet's surface. It produced no detectable effects from the planet and did not alter existing conditions. Both systems progressed independently without direct contact. What happened for that world to cease to exist? The body that activates the food chain. The Triceratops gives off a strong odor. Although only a few hours have passed since the enormous herbivore collapsed to the ground, dark clouds of flies swirl around its motionless snout and dull eyes, disturbed only by the flapping and screeching of the flying creatures that have already settled on the body. All of them wait. The food is there, ready, but the feast has not yet begun. Shortly before dying, in an internal agony marked by burning foam and the slow advance of a malignant cancer, the old male Triceratops weighed around 10 tons. He was not the largest Triceratops horridus, but he had managed to survive season after season, pushing and confronting other males with his enormous horns whenever it was necessary to assert his place. Each season, the three-horned rivals bellowed, covered themselves in mud and excrement, and measured their strength in large clearings covered with ferns that soon turned into mud pits under the trampling of powerful feet. However, during the last year, the bull began to feel unwell. A growing discomfort settled inside him. He could no longer take part in the annual territorial fights for mating, and began to avoid the irritable company of other Triceratops. He became a solitary figure in the landscape, a low mass of muscle and bone crowned with horns, spending much of his time breaking apart rotting logs at the edge of the Cretaceous forest and wallowing in foul-smelling pools. That mud added another layer of protection between his scaly skin and the biting insects that crept into every crevice. It was in one of those pools, used by generations of ceratopsians, that one day he fell asleep and did not rise again. The first to notice the corpse were the pterosaurs. For them, the task was simple. Supported in the air by daytime thermal currents, these flying reptiles covered in primitive fuzz could slowly circle on their membranous wings and detect remains ready to be exploited. They only had to descend to tear off dry strips of tendon or soft, decaying tissue. Their appearance vaguely resembled storks with bat wings, strange creatures that nevertheless had been the first vertebrates to develop active flight. From their insulating down to their hollow bones, everything about them was built for flying. But that aerial elegance was of little use when they touched the ground. When landing, they folded their wings, supported by an exaggeratedly elongated fourth finger, and walked awkwardly, as if moving on stilts, forming a disorderly and noisy group. Each descent to the ground had to be worth it. Moving across the flooded Cretaceous floodplain consumed more energy than staying aloft, and not all those that descended managed to take off again. Nothing from the enormous body of the horned dinosaur would go to waste. There was no mourning. A carcass of that size was food for countless stomachs, a reserve that would drive both large and small creatures as it was reintegrated into the environment. Even so, a Triceratops was not easy meat. The pterosaurs and fluttering birds, some with small teeth protruding from their beaks, had already stripped away what little soft tissue they could. Beaks probed the eyes, entered the nostrils and tore at the cloaca, making the body appear covered in small wounds. But the real riches lay deeper inside, protected by thick skin, layers of tissue and dense muscles. Reaching them required a powerful bite, a carnivore capable of breaking through that barrier. For more than a day after the bull died among the ferns, the winged scavengers had waited, screeching and arguing from the air or from their precarious footholds on the tough skin of the carcass, restless over a meal that could not begin without the arrival of the main guest. Finally, as bluish and violet light begins to spread across the plain on the second afternoon of waiting, a massive shadow emerges from the edge of the forest of bald cypresses and ginkgos. The carnivore does not hurry. At about 35 feet long and weighing more than 8 tons, it occupies the absolute top of its ecosystem. It is not invulnerable. Fractures, insect bites, and disease also affect it. But the only possible immediate threat would be another individual of its own species, and even then, few are larger than this imposing biped, essentially a set of jaws designed to crush bone with a body devoted almost entirely to that purpose. It is a Tyrannosaurus rex, the dominant predator of Hell Creek. Its reddish-brown skin, now bathed in orange and golden reflections from the low sun, stands out as it approaches the motionless body. From snout to tail tip, it is covered in small, granular scales, crossed by a fine layer of soft filaments that run along the neck and extend to the end of the tail. Some stiff hairs protrude from the chin and the upper jaws, almost completely concealing the rows of 7-inch fangs that fill its mouth, a constant supply of serrated blades that are replaced throughout its life. Another tyrannosaur might notice its ornamentation. Its skull is not smooth, but a relief of bumps, grooves, and ridges. Along the central axis of the snout, keratin-covered knobs line up, projecting above the eyes and giving it a permanent expression. They do not function as defense, but as a visual signal. Each one indicates maturity and strength, traits recognizable to others of its species during noisy reproductive encounters. The rex keeps its tiny arms tucked against its chest as it approaches the carcass. There is nothing to grasp. Each limb is strong and, in theory, capable of holding a body with its 2 curved claws, but most of the time these arms are a liability. An extended limb can break during a hunt or be torn apart by a rival. The entire body design of the tyrannosaur prioritizes the head, the jaws, and the bite, relegating those arms to a secondary role. Even so, the enormous amount of muscle and bone at the front requires powerful support behind. The hind legs, built to cover long distances, and the long tail, used as a counterbalance, keep the animal in a nearly horizontal posture, although it can rear up to reach food both on the ground and in low branches. It has spent years without facing a real threat. It is too large now, secure in its position as the dominant carnivore. The mottled camouflage of its youth is barely visible as darker shadows on the neck, belly, and thighs. The rest of the body has a reddish tone that allows it to blend into the forest shadows during hunting hours near dawn and dusk. A clever Edmontosaurus can outrun it in open terrain. Charging directly into a herd would waste energy. It is better to wait, move carefully, and concentrate all its weight into a first, devastating bite. Even if the prey survives the initial attack, shock and blood loss do the rest. For this hunter, caution is essential, a domain built with time and risk. Although hadrosaurs lack defensive horns like Triceratops and are not covered by dense bony plates like Ankylosaurus, their thick muscular tails remain dangerous. A kicking, thrashing Edmontosaurus cannot immediately kill an adult female tyrannosaur, but a fracture to an arm or the tibia is enough to cause infections and pain capable of bringing down even the most imposing predator. For that reason, care and timing are essential for the rex. In fact, the most troublesome enemies of a tyrannosaur are the smallest ones. As she moves toward the body, the female opens her mouth in a wide yawn, and an intense stench rises from her jaws. It is not just the smell of rotting meat or dinosaur breath. Beneath the broad tongue, small lesions can be seen, home to microscopic parasites that slowly advance through her jaws. She acquired them unknowingly while feeding on a hadrosaur that carried an organism dependent on both predator and prey to complete its life cycle. Over time, those parasites will multiply, perforate the throat, and open holes in the lower jaw, painful wounds that will make eating or hunting almost impossible. But that outcome has not yet arrived. Today, before the mature flesh of the Triceratops, she remains the absolute owner of her territory in Hell Creek. Her most distant ancestors were anything but majestic. More than 160 million years ago, in the early Triassic, the ancestors of dinosaurs were tiny, unassuming creatures. Covered in fine fuzz, the largest barely reached about 4 inches at the hip. They did not tear apart prey with fangs or claws. They carried no armor or spines. They did not fly. Those slender protodinosaurs moved by hopping. For them, the best food imaginable was a shiny, crunchy beetle. They took advantage of their active metabolism to dart through forests watched over by much larger, more threatening reptiles. Even when these protodinosaurs grew to sizes comparable to a German shepherd, they continued eating insects and leaves. They neither dominated nor inspired fear. In those Triassic days, ancient relatives of crocodiles were the most prominent vertebrates in the landscape, occupying roles dinosaurs would later assume. It was in that context that the first dinosaurs appeared, and it took almost the entire Triassic for any to reach large sizes or become central components of ecosystems. Without a mass extinction, it is possible those early dinosaurs would have continued competing with other strange reptiles that arrived first. The dinosaurs could not have known it, but those modest origins made the difference. Insulating down, elevated metabolism and limbs positioned directly beneath the body gave them an advantage when a phase of intense volcanic activity began reshaping the planet's climate tens of millions of years before the time of Tyrannosaurus rex. It was not a scene of continuous explosions. The Earth slowly oozed, with lava spreading across vast areas and releasing large amounts of carbon dioxide. The oceans began to acidify, and the climate became unstable, alternating between periods of extreme heat and abrupt cooling. Dinosaurs with active physiologies managed to persist, as did small proto-mammals, while many of the dominant reptiles of the time, including several ancient relatives of crocodiles, were decimated. Some survived, but the balance shifted. Dinosaurs came to occupy the main ecological roles, and crocodiles were relegated to aquatic and swampy environments. Thus began a dinosaur expansion that would last for tens of millions of years. As for the famous Tyrannosaurus rex, its specific lineage traces back deep into the Jurassic. Its ancestors were small and agile, with 3 claws and shallow jaws. They were not giant monsters covered in filaments, nor did they possess terrifying jaws. Other carnivorous dinosaurs, such as allosaurs, megalosaurs, and ceratosaurs, arrived earlier and dominated predation for millions of years. Tyrannosaurs were present, but most were secondary, until roughly 14 million years before the moment described here. In the northern hemisphere, the great predators of earlier times began to decline. A space opened. Then the tyrannosaurs grew. They became ever larger, with arms reduced to minimal details compared with enormous muscle-laden skulls. The back of the skull widened to accommodate more muscle mass devoted to closing the jaws with force and controlling prey with the neck. The eyes, once oriented to the sides, shifted forward, granting an unexpected depth perception. In addition, these new tyrannosaurs developed an extraordinary sense of smell. The olfactory bulbs of their brains exceeded in size the areas devoted to other processes. From teeth to tail, they became carnivores unlike any before them. In the final days of the Cretaceous, tyrannosaurs live up to their name. They control their environment in such a way that they prevent the rise of competitors. Small carnivores such as Atrociraptor pursue rodents and exploit remains in Hell Creek, and a human-sized predator like Dakotaraptor can frighten a tyrannosaur juvenile, but the tyrant lizard has no true rival in these forests and plains. Instead of dividing carnivorous roles among different specialized species, Tyrannosaurus occupies almost the entire spectrum by itself. The drastic changes they undergo during growth have allowed them to displace other predators. Hatchlings resemble ancestors more than adults. Emerging from grapefruit-sized eggs, they are fuzzy, big-eyed and long-legged, more like toothy roadrunners than 9-ton killers. They capture insects, lizards, small mammals and carrion when they can, with long, low skulls during childhood and adolescence. Around 11 years of age, something changes. They continue gaining weight at an astonishing rate, but their skulls transform. The jaws deepen, and increased muscle allows the mouth to close with ever greater force. By around 20 years, a Tyrannosaurus rex can bring down large prey and reduce the remains of a horned or duck-billed dinosaur to splinters and waste. That is why no similarly sized rival species exist in the region. This species has displaced them in a prolonged evolutionary race in which hatchlings, juveniles and adults occupy different niches, a single dominant form extending through the forests and streams of Hell Creek. And it requires space. Across all of North America there are only about 20,000 individuals, each with its own territory, jaws that rule the territory. The large female does not bother watching for other predators as she approaches the carcass, leaving enormous 3-toed footprints pressed into the soft ground. Even if a rival were nearby, she would hardly stop. She detected the Triceratops's body hours earlier, a faint signal carried on the afternoon breeze, and now advances decisively through clearings and tall rows of dawn redwoods, metasequoia, following a trail that grows stronger with every step. As she closes in, she snaps her jaws together. The sharp, forceful sound sends pterosaurs and toothed birds scattering, pulling away from the body like oversized flies. She wastes no time. She plants her left foot on ground already damp with fluids beginning to seep from the carcass, leans back and lifts one of her massive three-clawed feet, bringing it down on the belly. Thick scales and tough skin resist the first scratch and the second as well, but the third blow opens a wide, uneven tear as the body wall gives way. A heavy mass of viscera slides outward, and the great tyrant lowers her head to begin shoving enormous mouthfuls of entrails into her jaws. She could tear off an entire leg and carry it away, or sever the head from the body if she wished, and perhaps she will later. But there is no need for such brutal methods yet. The softest and most appealing parts remain intact. Like a terrible seesaw, she plunges her snout in and gathers another 100 kilograms of increasingly shredded flesh, jerking her head upward to fling the food to the back of her throat. Her relatives among crocodiles and birds use the same technique. It is an ancient skill known as inertial feeding, especially useful for animals without prehensile hands or the ability to chew. Her jaws function as living scissors, made to grip and cut. The heavy work falls to the stomach muscles and digestive acids, which must extract as many nutrients as possible in the short time each meal lasts. Such is life with a fast metabolism. She cannot gorge and then remain motionless for days, while everything slowly dissolves. Her effectiveness as a predator depends on speed and strength, and feeding carries a high cost. The body must act quickly to exploit each meal before the tasty tissues are transformed into mounds of waste filled with muscle fibers and bone fragments. The Rex eats greedily, paying little attention to the aerial scavengers that try to steal a piece whenever she lifts her head to swallow. Although the Triceratops is rich fare, appetite exceeds stomach capacity. Almost immediately after gulping down another mouthful, she turns and vomits everything she has eaten, a pulped mass of the herbivore. She shakes her head, snorts, and returns to the fresh meat, while pterosaurs and birds plunge onto the expelled remains. There is food enough for every hungry mouth. Hour after hour, the body diminishes. Bones that were once scraped by small teeth to reach dense muscles are now torn free and crushed by massive jaws in search of scraps and marrow. The female directs the scene without hostility. She can only eat a certain amount at a time, and when she withdraws to doze clumsily in the shade of nearby palms, other carnivores approach to take their share. Alone or in pairs, small dromaeosaurs inspect the shattered bones. What is a leftover to the Rex is a full meal to them. Even so, some argue and screech over the right to the feast, leaving brown and white feathers scattered around as each bird, raptor and pterosaur tries to obtain something. The exchange continues, the Rex taking her portion and the companions exploiting what remains, a rudimentary order within the bloody chaos. Soon little remains but a three-horned skull, foul-smelling, covered by a dry, leathery layer of drained flesh. The best cuts from the limbs, hips, tail and neck are already gone. The Rex, her belly now fuller of bone than of meat, sniffs the battered skull and nudges it with her snout. There is nothing left for her. The smell is no longer of food but of death. She leaves the remains to the other consumers, flies, burrowing beetles that will raise their larvae inside the bones, fungi that will sprout from the enriched soil, and an uncountable number of microorganisms that will complete the great recycling process. This Triceratops will not join its relatives in the fossil record. Only the trampled earth will indicate that it was ever there. With her belly full, the Rex resumes her wandering stride. The only nest she knows is the one she forms each night within her territory, a space of shifting boundaries that demands constant marking and defense against other members of her species. Even so, her reptilian brain assumes she will not encounter another tyrannosaur. If she enters a clearing and detects a large, filament-covered silhouette among the trees, she will respond with a direct challenge to protect her domain. But the morning passes calmly. The sun is still low, spilling golden light over swamps and groves. The Rex continues her patrol without a fixed direction, senses alert to any novelty. Although she does not need to hunt now, she soon will again, and it is wise to position herself where prey is likely. Not just any animal will do. The Hell Creek ecosystem teems with life. Insects buzz among the trees. Crocodiles and similar forms called champsosaurs attack fish and small turtles in plant-choked swamps. Furry mammals communicate from burrows and branches. Lizards race along trunks and snakes slide through ferns. Each morning begins with a chorus of birds and pterosaurs calling to one another, a din capable of waking almost any dinosaur. The Rex could eat any of them, but small prey is reserved for moments of urgency. Her ideal food must justify the effort, be large, and be careless enough to fall to surprise, choosing prey in a crowded world. From time to time she feeds on medium-sized dinosaurs, especially when she is lucky enough to find a recent carcass. Most, however, are either too fast or not worth the effort. Ornithomimus, with their ostrich-like appearance and long feathers on their arms, are easy to recognize but run far too quickly. Pachycephalosaurus, with their domed skulls, are also agile and are not numerous. Small raptors usually flee when they sense a tyrannosaur, and in her experience, only approach when they are trying to feed from the same body. As for Thescelosaurus, a biped with a beak, it has no defenses beyond its natural camouflage, but it scarcely justifies the energy required to catch it. Among the large herbivores common to the region, only two are worth attempting to hunt. Edmontosaurus, with their broad beaks, move in herds. The multitude of watchful eyes makes stalking difficult, although that same sense of security produces more relaxed individuals. In addition, their thick tails provide enough meat for several days. Triceratops present a greater challenge. When young they group together, but as they grow they tend to separate. At times they gather to graze, though they do not form organized herds. Bringing one down requires practice and luck. Their long horns can cause serious injuries, and only a brutal first bite from behind offers any advantage before it can turn and face the attacker. Even so, confronting them is still preferable to dealing with an Ankylosaurus. Ankylosaurus, low slung in body, is not indestructible, but it has armor even on its eyelids. For a tyrannosaur, finding a vulnerable point involves time and risk, while exposing itself to a tail club the size of a car tire, capable of pulverizing bones with a single blow. For that reason, the female fed on only one in her entire life. When she found an individual that had died of natural causes, rolled it over with effort, and accessed the swollen, soft belly. That morning there are no signs of her preferred prey. Birds burst from the undergrowth at her approach, and mammals protest with high-pitched sounds. But she still must travel some distance to find suitable hunting ground. She is also thirsty. When the mid-morning sun begins to erase the long shadows, she passes through a stand of dawn redwoods beside a small pond and lowers her head to drink. A turtle slips from a log into the water and vanishes into the stirred sediment. Then another splash is heard as a toothed bird drops from a branch and quickly emerges with something small and silvery in its beak. The Rex watches the bird depart, more curious than hungry. Around her, everything tends to fall still, and any movement draws her attention. She snorts, takes another large, awkward gulp, shakes her body from snout to tail, and moves back into the trees. She will never again feel the warm pulse of fresh blood in her mouth. Unbeknownst to her and to any other living being, the end of the world is advancing at 20 kilometers per second. Elsewhere in the North Horn Formation, east of Utah, a tiny dinosaur moves within its own private pond. The embryo grinds nearly microscopic teeth as it searches for a more comfortable position. It will not be long now. The space inside the rigid egg grows ever tighter with the rapid growth of the long neck, and the temporary tooth that will serve to open the shell protrudes from the snout like an absurd bump. In the final months, the baby has gone from a cluster of dividing cells to a creature recognizable as a dinosaur. Nerves, blood, muscles, bones, teeth, and organs have organized into an animal that will one day be called Alamosaurus sanjuanensis, one of the largest to have ever walked the earth. The forming titan is part of a clutch of 12 eggs, laid in a shallow sandy nest by a mother more than 80 feet long and weighing over 20 tons. Some adults reach even greater sizes. The largest exceed 100 feet from the fine-toothed snout to the tip of the narrow tail. At the shoulders, they rise higher than an upright Tyrannosaurus rex. It is not that tyrannosaurs could approach to verify it. A single blow from a muscular tail or a step from pillar-like legs is enough to destroy even the largest of the filament-covered carnivores. At less than half the length and barely a third of the weight of an Alamosaurus, tyrannosaurs rarely hunt these giants and usually wait for them to die from other causes. A simple bacterial infection can provide food for weeks for a tyrannosaur, which might even take up residence inside the body and work through it from within. Giants that return, hatchlings that vanish. Not all tyrannosaurs get to enjoy such prolonged feasts. Alamosaurus comes from southern lands, one of the bulky, broad-trunked titanosaurs that spread during the Cretaceous across Africa and South America. Although it shares the basic body plan of earlier sauropods such as Brontosaurus, this group is far more robust. Two animals of equal length, one an Alamosaurus and the other a Brontosaurus, show very marked differences in weight, something that is even recorded in their footprints. Jurassic giants such as Brontosaurus and Diplodocus carried most of their mass over the hips, leaving deeper rear impressions than front ones. Alamosaurus works differently. In titanosaurs, the center of gravity lies closer to the shoulders, with forelimbs wrapped in powerful musculature, producing deeper front impressions than those of other long-necked sauropods. These colossi are the dinosaurs that, toward the end of the Cretaceous, returned north and occupied a space that had remained empty for tens of millions of years. On the northern continents, the dominant large herbivores were duck-billed dinosaurs, horned dinosaurs, and ankylosaurs, whose ability to cut, crush, and chew plant matter as fibrous as rotting logs gave them an evolutionary advantage. Sauropods had vanished from the scene. The arrival of Alamosaurus in North America during the Cretaceous marked the return of giants that consumed tons of vegetation to ferment and break it down in enormous intestines. When they gathered, the smell of methane could become suffocating. Even so, Alamosaurus did not spread across the entire continent. This voracious species never reached regions as far north as Hell Creek. Ancient New Mexico, Texas, and Utah represent the limit of its advance, just within the southern range of the ultimate tyrannosaur. The North Horn environment is one of the few places on the planet at any time where bone-crushing tyrannosaurs can feed on a sauropod dinosaur. For those predators, a developing Alamosaurus amounts to very little. The egg enclosing the embryo is only about the size of a baseball. When it breaks free of the shell, the hatchling will be no larger than a domestic cat, little more than an insignificant bite, even for an adolescent Tyrannosaurus rex. Adult Alamosaurus do little to deter predators, unlike other dinosaurs that protect their young for extended periods. Like other sauropods, they lay large clutches, remain near the nest during incubation out of instinct, and depart as hatching approaches. The hatchlings are left alone. Their chirps are heard only by one another, and by the small mammals, crocodiles, snakes, and feathered dinosaurs that feed on them as they leave the nest and disperse through the Cretaceous forest. For this reason, every element of the legs, which initially forms as cartilage, ossifies and fuses before the rest of the tiny skeleton. They must be ready to run from the moment their small limbs touch the outside ground. From that point on, chance determines who survives the first year. Most do not, living under constant threat. The itching returns again and again. It is an irritating impulse that runs through the young hadrosaur's body, itch after itch, an intense tingling between the toes and along the scale-covered flanks. For the young Edmontosaurus, there is only one possible solution. In the shade of the forest, at the edge of the small group to which it belongs, the broad-beaked herbivore stops to relieve the burning sensation. A beech tree is perfect for the task. The tangle of low trunks creates a row of large surfaces for scratching, each wrapped in bark rough enough to do the job. The dinosaur leans its thick tail back, using its body like a seesaw, and lifts the front half as it moves slowly forward, rubbing and pressing against the coarse trunks. The friction provides brief relief that spreads across the rounded scales covering its skin. This particular Edmontosaurus, still a young male about 18 feet long, is not the first to use this spot. The bark of the beech and nearby trees, sycamores, dogwoods, laurels, has been polished, worn, and opened by dinosaurs seeking to soothe similar discomforts. Thick sap has oozed from the wounds in the trunks, trapping flies and other invertebrates before hardening into resin. One day, perhaps, those blobs will become amber. For now, they are only sticky remains and clear signs left by the mega herbivores that inhabit this part of the floodplain. For generations, dinosaurs have marked their forest this way, each scratch triggering the same behavior until Edmontosaurus groups recognize their preferred places. The juvenile snorts with satisfaction as it settles back onto all 4 feet. The hands, surrounded by fleshy pads, touch the ground while the large 3-toed hind feet resume their stride. No matter how much relief it felt, lagging behind for too long is dangerous. Although it is large enough to evade small predators such as Acroraptor, and even to drive them off with a lash of its muscular tail, it is still exactly the right size to become a full day's meal for an adult Tyrannosaurus rex. It is unwise to tempt a sudden bite from behind. Step by step, the Edmontosaurus catches up with the rest of the group and works its way back into the compact mass of bodies as the hadrosaurs advance, crushing forest vegetation beneath them. The constant fear of sharp teeth and hidden eyes in the shadows has led Edmontosaurus to modify the environment without intending to. They move within a landscape governed by fear, and the group's movement traces the boundaries of an invisible territory that changes over time. A solitary Edmontosaurus has no obvious defenses. It lacks the horns of Triceratops and the plates embedded in the skin of Ankylosaurus. A large adult can kick, swing its tail and struggle if attacked, but by then the damage may already be too severe to survive. By adulthood, all have witnessed similar scenes: a sudden charge from the forest edge, an explosion of enormous jaws emerging from the gloom to crush and devour. For this reason, Edmontosaurus distrust the boundary between trees and open ground. The many trunks can easily conceal a lurking tyrannosaur, and perhaps only the snap of a branch or the shriek of a startled bird serves as warning. Open grasslands and floodplains, by contrast, feel safer. There are no surprises there. Any Tyrannosaurus rex attempting to approach must abandon cover, and by then the hadrosaurs have their main advantage: speed. Despite their powerful bite, adult tyrannosaurs are not fast. Most of the time they move at a slow pace. At maximum effort, they can reach about 15 miles per hour. They do not need more. They did not evolve to pursue prey over long distances. Their method is to wait and launch a single charge when the moment is right. If they miss, or if the prey detects the threat before that critical instant, the hunt ends and the carnivore withdraws. Over millions of years of coexistence between tyrannosaurs and hadrosaurs, this strategy has shaped Edmontosaurus. With enough space, adults can rise onto their hind legs and flee at nearly 28 miles per hour. It is not a record, but it is enough. If one detects the predator and gives the alarm bellow, the entire group rears up and runs, leaving the Tyrannosaurus rex to wait for another opportunity. Of course, they are not always alert. Some fall, especially when they must cross wooded areas to reach grazing grounds. As with carnivores in any era, tyrannosaurs prefer to attack the old, the sick, and the young, generally avoiding healthy adults. Although an Edmontosaurus has nothing with which to pierce or crush a Tyrannosaurus rex, it can kick and thrash with enough force to fracture bones. For that reason, the predator usually focuses on younger individuals, creating evolutionary pressure to grow quickly. By increasing in size rapidly, Edmontosaurus reach a less attractive dimension for hunters sooner. If they manage to survive their first year, their chances steadily improve until old age, when joints begin to fail. These interactions shape the Hell Creek landscape. Plants support the food web, but forces also act from above. Ecosystems do not grow only from the ground up. They are compressed between multiple pressures and evolve just like animals. Thus, Edmontosaurus groups, without knowing it, favor their own survival by maintaining expanses of open, low vegetation. Without them, and without Triceratops, much of Hell Creek would be dense forest. Young trees would compete for space and light, and the Cretaceous woodland would be far thicker. With hungry mega-herbivores present, shoots and saplings are torn out before they can establish themselves. Edmontosaurus function as inadvertent gardeners, clearing the terrain they prefer. In addition, their constant movement creates paths and depresses the ground. As seasons pass, the hollows fill with water and turn into ponds, altering habitats through simple repetition. Even so, even the most favorable environments bring discomforts. Tyrannosaurus rex is not the only being that feeds on dinosaurs. In fact, the young Edmontosaurus is already being consumed. The itching is only a sign, but it ignores the cause: lice. The Edmontosaurus body is an ideal refuge for these parasites and their descendants, with broad expanses of flexible skin ready to be pierced. Although the skin is tough and protects against abrasion, it also forms dark, warm folds where lice thrive. There they bite into small blood vessels and feed. That blood sustains new generations that repeat the cycle. Constant contact among group members facilitates their spread. In adults, lice are mostly a nuisance. They cause itching and wounds, but they are part of daily life. In hatchlings, by contrast, a heavy infestation can slow growth because of the strain on the immune system. The best they can hope for is to find trees to scratch against, mud to wallow in, or cold nights that reduce parasite numbers. The group now moves into open ground, leaving the forest behind, and enters a broad clearing with ferns, cycads, and scattered palms. It is a disturbed, damp place, once a major plant feeding ground, and now a temporary stop not yet fully regenerated. Edmontosaurus and Triceratops have transformed the landscape. They eat shoots, knock down trees, and churn the soil with their steps, keeping the grassland sparse. Even so, they feed. They lower their long, square snouts to tear and grind plants. These are not duckbills, but shovel-like tools capable of processing tough vegetation. The tip of the snout forms a broad beak with sharp edges, designed to gather large amounts of low plants. In addition, each Edmontosaurus has more than 1,000 tightly packed teeth. When new, they are diamond-shaped. When worn, they form flat surfaces that grind like enormous molars. In cold seasons, they can chew rotting logs for fiber, with fungi and insects adding some protein. The skull is not rigid. The bones flex with each chew, expanding and compressing the dental surface for more effective grinding. The system is remarkable, accompanied by a small fleshy crest on the head used for recognition among them, a strange but useful ornament. The group remains calm as it snorts and grazes. There is no scent of predators and no trace of carrion. The day is clear, the breeze eases the heat, and the 13 members of the small group feed without interruption. None of them knows what has just happened. There were no signs, no change in the sky. In Hell Creek, everything appears the same. But more than 2,000 miles away, an extraterrestrial rock more than 7 miles wide has just struck the Earth. Thus begins the end. A chain of impossible events. The rock did not appear out of nowhere. That lethal fragment has a history of its own, an origin that unfolded over millions of years while dinosaurs were born, lived, and disappeared. The elements that led to this moment began long ago and at immense distances, a chain of chance events that can only be understood by looking backward. The collapse of life on Earth began far away, in cold, dark space. The Oort cloud is an ancient haze that surrounds the solar system. It contains an impossible-to-calculate number of objects, millions, billions, trillions. Even if someone had been present when the rock in question formed and devoted an entire lifetime to counting the icy fragments floating there, they would die without having made much progress. The place has an austere beauty, but it also functions as the solar system's dump, a repository of meteors, comets, and asteroids made from leftover material that never became part of a planet. Within that frozen immensity exists one specific rock that matters here. It is a solid, solitary block, indifferent, that over time will become the most lethal object life on Earth has ever faced. It is enormous, a stony mass drifting through the void. Its composition classifies it as a carbonaceous chondrite, an ancient type of space rock speckled with tiny points. Those grains, called chondrules, are droplets of molten minerals such as pyroxene trapped within the stone. It is a remnant from an even more remote era that managed to avoid both destruction and incorporation into larger bodies. The exact place this fragment comes from has been lost. Perhaps it was once part of a planet that was torn apart by an impact. Perhaps it is a leftover from the planet-forming process, excess mass clinging to a cosmic vessel. It has traveled for eons within a vast congregation of suspended rocks, colliding with other bodies and receiving impacts that left scars. With a diameter of tens of miles, it is too large to disappear completely, so it continues to accumulate marks from its long youth in space. Something begins to change. An invisible force starts to draw the rock inward toward the solar system. It is not a science fiction tractor beam, but the comparison is useful. The gravity of the Sun and of Jupiter is impossible to avoid. The Sun, with a mass hundreds of thousands of times greater than Earth's, and Jupiter more than 300 times as massive as our planet, generate enough attraction to divert enormous bodies onto new trajectories. Little by little, the rock approaches the space between them. The distance between the Sun and Jupiter is so vast that it would seem easy to get lost there. The intervening void is more than 2.5 times the distance between Earth and Mars, a space in which even planets appear tiny. The asteroid could have settled there, slowly circling while small impacts wore it down over time. But that does not happen. As it approaches, the rock begins to heat up. Heat causes expansion. Internal weaknesses appear as it draws ever closer to the gas giant. It advances imperceptibly toward a collision. Gravity becomes overwhelming. The asteroid is stretched, elongated like cosmic taffy, shifting from a compact shape to a drawn-out structure. It is the instant before rupture, like the rubber of a slingshot just before release, and then it breaks. A rock that endured countless blows during its long drift suddenly fragments. Some pieces fall toward Jupiter and sink beneath its clouds. Others escape. One of them, more than 7 miles wide, avoids capture and is flung outward by the encounter. That fragment begins moving toward the third planet from the Sun. This is an accidental extinction. Other similar bodies have formed in the same way, but almost all have failed to reach their target. They passed by without Earth's organisms ever knowing. Even if someone had known what was approaching, nothing could have been done. This time the rock will strike. It will not be deflected by another object. It will not collide with Mars or the Moon. Out of millions of potentially lethal rocks, this is the one that hits. An accident without intent or malice, but with devastating consequences. An ending and at the same time a beginning, marking the boundary between the age of reptiles and the rise of mammalian dominance. The rock travels at extreme speed, so fast it cannot be clearly observed. It moves at more than 44,000 miles per hour. There is no easy comparison. Almost nothing in human experience crosses space at that pace. It is not a matter of blinking and missing it. Even attentive, it would pass unnoticed. The Earth is also moving. Our planet does not stand still. It orbits the Sun at about 67,000 miles per hour. All that speed goes unnoticed until two moving bodies collide. For a brief and terrible instant, the asteroid draws a bright line across the sky. Friction on entering the atmosphere causes the air to scour the surface of the rock, tearing away fragments and making it glow. This is not a pebble that disintegrates before reaching the ground. It is a mass miles wide. There is no way to stop it. It strikes the ancient Yucatan Peninsula at a 45-degree angle, too fast to be seen, a direct blow to the planet. In Hell Creek, nothing visible happens. The group of Edmontosaurus, still full, moves on in search of shade to pass the afternoon and perhaps find a mud wallow to cool off. They walk without noticing any change. Along their route they pass a young female Torosaurus, a solitary 3-horned individual uncommon in that region. She measures about 20 feet in length and is still small for her species. As an adult she will reach around 30 feet and weigh up to 6 tons, enough to deter any tyrannosaur. But now she is just entering adulthood. A different unease than that of the hadrosaurs, the biological urge to reproduce agitates her. She rubs her keratin-covered horns against the bark of a dogwood, opening wounds from which sap flows. Soon she will seek a mate. From bones alone, distinguishing male from female Torosaurus is difficult. The skeletons are identical in size and ornamentation. These signals serve for recognition at a distance. Triceratops, a close relative, is more common and very similar. The main difference lies in the large bony frill of the skull. In Triceratops it is solid. In Torosaurus it is pierced by 2 large openings and surrounded by a greater number of small triangular bones which lighten the structure. It is not a defensive ornament. A skilled tyrannosaur can overcome either and bite the vulnerable neck. Even so, recognizing the correct frill is vital. In this species, females display and males observe. Confusing a Triceratops with a Torosaurus can end in a fatal goring. The female shows her own signal. For almost her entire life, the skin of the frill was light brown with cream-colored spots. Now the centers of those areas are beginning to turn red. Blood vessels respond to an ancient internal clock, changing the color of the frill. Triceratops does not show this trait. Torosaurus does flush red. Courtship is complex. Physiology alone is not enough. She has seen others bellow, feign charges, and present themselves in profile. Females decide, accepting or rejecting with pushes from their long horns. Torosaurus reaches sexual maturity before attaining full size. She will continue growing for another decade. This rapid reproductive strategy, inherited from distant ancestors, allowed reptiles to dominate for millions of years. And so the final day passes, the need to create a future that will never arrive. Nothing suggested an imminent end. Calling the Hell Creek ecosystem the peak of dinosaur evolution is not entirely accurate. The region is saturated with dinosaurs, but that had happened before in other places and times. More than 80 million years earlier, in this same area, several species of giant long-necked herbivores roamed fern-covered plains, while carnivores, comparable in size to Tyrannosaurus rex, stalked through tall conifer forests. That late Jurassic world was the first time dinosaurs cast truly enormous shadows across the Earth, reaching unprecedented sizes and forms. The smallest barely exceeded the size of a pigeon, and the largest stretched more than 100 feet from slender snout to the tip of whip-like tails. Dinosaurs never existed in isolation from the rest of their environment. The reason such immense organisms could arise had to do with parallel changes in plants, insects, mammals, and many other forms of life. The world was not made up solely of plants meant to feed herbivores that in turn served as food for carnivores. Each species performed multiple roles and maintained numerous connections, generating more diversity as evolution advanced generation after generation. The age of dinosaurs was a great explosion of life. What is striking is how long it lasted. Mass extinctions do not follow regular cycles. Since the first animals flourished in the Cambrian seas, it seemed that life could not go more than 90 million years without a major catastrophe. At times, the interval was even shorter. Barely 50 million years separated the worst-known extinction from the Triassic event that allowed dinosaurs to gain ecological advantage. Yet after that, there was no other global extinction. For 135 million years, life expanded without the threat of total annihilation. Diversity tends to generate even more diversity. This may seem contradictory given what is about to happen, but major collapses are not the only drivers of change. Extinctions wipe out entire networks of species, leaving survivors to occupy new spaces. There is no evolutionary rule requiring the appearance of a specific species. There was no void demanding the existence of a Tyrannosaurus rex or a Triceratops. These creatures arose through variation and selection, a continuous process that reshapes the distribution of living forms. Extinctions destroy, but by themselves they do not guarantee new flourishing. Some of the most productive moments in the history of life were not tied to extinctions, but to internal evolutionary accidents, such as when limb-bearing fish began moving across muddy flats and opened the path to terrestrial vertebrates. This is what happened during the height of the dinosaurs, over millions of years from the Jurassic through the Cretaceous. Giant herbivores such as Alamosaurus did not appear because they were necessary or inevitable. They arose from constant pressure between predators and prey. Growing quickly and reaching great size offered protection against carnivores that were also evolving toward larger forms. These colossi could exist because large bodies can survive on enormous quantities of low-quality food supplied by fast-growing plants such as ferns. As these dinosaurs increased in size, opportunities opened for smaller species sharing the same environment, as well as for countless organisms that benefited from their presence, from parasites to insects that fed on dung. Life created the conditions for more life, much as a tall forest creates distinct environments in its canopy, understory, and trunks. This balance took time to build, and the Mesozoic was, in many ways, an endless summer for reptiles. Mammals also experienced their own period of success during these millions of years. Although they are often portrayed as insignificant creatures surviving on insects while dinosaurs dominated, the reality is different. The first mammals appeared at roughly the same time as dinosaurs and thrived alongside them. They never exceeded the size of a domestic cat, but not all were timid insect eaters. There were forms resembling primitive beavers, flying squirrels, anteaters, or raccoons. They did not arise because dinosaurs yielded space to them, but because they exploited small-scale opportunities. The emergence of social insects such as termites provided food for mammals capable of digging. The seasonal abundance of dinosaur hatchlings drove the evolution of mammals that preyed on eggs and newborns. Tall forests with canopies beyond the reach of large carnivores offered refuge to species that moved among trees using skin membranes. Mammals did not passively wait for their chance. They also altered the world simply by existing, generating more diversity over time. The proliferation of Mesozoic mammals is crucial to what is to come. Had they been few or too similar to one another, they would have been extremely vulnerable. Variety is not merely an ornament of life, but the foundation of survival. In critical moments, small differences determine who persists and who disappears. The greater the diversity, the higher the likelihood that some species will endure. Hell Creek hosts nearly as many species of mammals as dinosaurs, though one must change scale to notice them. An animal the size of an opossum, Didelphodon, crosses a stream with a wet snout, feeding on anything it finds, from snails to small dinosaurs. High on a branch of a dawn redwood, Chimolestes, rat-like with a prehensile tail, searches for insects beneath the bark. At ground level, Mesodma, similar to a squirrel, pokes its snout out of its burrow and tests the air before emerging. In a matter of moments, these creatures will face the same trial as the dinosaurs, the greatest challenge to life's diversity in more than 100 million years. Elsewhere, somewhere above the North Atlantic, there is no need to flap wings. A great flyer remains aloft with wings outstretched, while warm currents cause slight vibrations in the membranes connecting arms and body. The day is clear and calm. Quetzalcoatlus northropi is the largest flying animal that has ever existed. Too large to be bothered by birds or smaller pterosaurs, and too high to worry about the shadows of mosasaurs moving beneath the ocean surface. It is heading back. It does not conceive of a permanent home, but something in its reptilian brain drives it to return to the place where it was born, a flat plain covered with ferns. There will be others there. Quetzalcoatlus gather to display mate and nesting groups, with dozens of nests separated by little more than a wingspan. The acrid smell of guano is intense but unavoidable. Tyrannosaurs capture individuals that nest alone or too far away, and their eggs and young are prey for the dinosaur Anzu. Together they may lose some members, but not even an adult Tyrannosaurus rex knows how to face a wall of shrieking pterosaurs advancing clumsily. These giants survive together or not at all. The Quetzalcoatlus gliding over the ocean is a survivor. After several close encounters with Acaroraptor when it was still a hatchling, it managed to grow to a wingspan of about 33 feet. For more than a decade, it has followed the seasons between hemispheres, stopping here and there to catch small dinosaurs among the ferns before rising again. If any creature knows the late Cretaceous world, from swamps and forests to mountains and seas, it is this pterosaur. It snaps its jaws. It is hungry. It will need food soon, but descending now would be risky. If it drops too low, it could be taken by a large marine reptile or a sharp-toothed shark. It has seen it happen before, when a smaller pterosaur vanished amid foam and blood. Besides, its jaws are not made to catch fish in flight. Water offers too much resistance. Dipping its beak into the surface would make it fall, forcing it to struggle to take off again and expend more energy than it would gain. It is better to wait for solid ground. There it can catch young dinosaurs. Though awkward on foot, it can move with long strides, overtaking small prey, striking them against the ground and swallowing them whole without teeth for chewing. A few mouthfuls will provide enough energy to complete the return journey. It will not be long now. Soon it will arrive. The extinction of the previous world. The first hour does not end in silence, but in exhaustion. What follows the impact is not a single instant, but a chain of effects that overlap without pause. The ankylosaur does not understand what is happening, but its body registers every signal. For years, its armor protected it from teeth, claws, and charges. The hardened plates along its back, the lateral spikes, the reinforced eyelids, and the bony club of its tail were enough to keep even the most persistent tyrannosaurs at bay. When one came too close, it only had to fold its legs, lower its body, and swing its tail with precision. Those who ignored the warning usually left with broken bones, or did not leave at all. But this time there is no predator. The danger has no shape, no smell, no direction. The ground vibrates. It is not a brief tremor, but an oscillation that runs through the earth as if something enormous were pulling at it from below. Minutes earlier, the ankylosaur had reached the shore of a lake with stony edges, a firm place to drink without the risk of sinking into soft mud laden with decaying remains. As soon as it began to drink, the surface beneath its feet ceased to be stable. Everything started to shake as if dozens of invisible animals were jumping at the same time. There were no other dinosaurs nearby, only some birds and pterosaurs circling in the sky. At the forest edge, trunks swayed back and forth, the canopies shook, birds screamed. A tall dawn redwood toppled sideways, tearing up soil and knocking down another tree as it fell. Then, without warning, the movement stopped. The forest recovered its posture. The lake grew still, the air felt strange. The ankylosaur remained motionless, tail raised, breathing. It had no prior experience with which to interpret what had happened. The silence was worse than the shaking. Hell Creek was rarely quiet. Even at night there were sounds, insects, calls, movement. Now there was nothing. It waited. Nothing happened. It decided to move away from the water and return to its usual refuge, a shaded depression among conifers where it rested each day. It had not taken many steps when another jolt ran through the ground. This one was stronger. The waves arrived in pulses, separated by minutes. The strategy that had worked its entire life was useless. There was no way to defend against the ground moving beneath its feet. The impact that began everything was not inevitable. The sequence that reached Hell Creek depended on precise details. If the object had entered at a different speed, if the Earth had rotated a few degrees more, if the strike had been vertical, or if the impact point had been covered by deep ocean, the outcome would have been different. A marine impact would have dissipated part of the energy in water. A strike on carbon-rich rocks would have ignited underground deposits and released carbon dioxide gradually. Even a collision on inert rock would have caused local destruction without immediate global effects. None of that happened. The rocky body arrived from the northeast and entered at an angle close to 45 degrees. It did not pass through the atmosphere as a clean fall. It was an oblique blow. In a fraction of a second, the Earth's crust opened. The energy released exceeded any useful comparison. There was no explosion in the common sense of the term. There was a release of force equivalent to tens of teratons of dynamite, a figure that loses meaning when one tries to imagine it. The rock did not stop at the surface. It plunged in, the crust melted. Material that did not vaporize behaved like a thick fluid. Stone was forced upward and outward, forming walls that could not support themselves. A central peak rose and collapsed almost immediately. All of this occurred within minutes. The crater was not the end, but the visible beginning. The energy had to travel. It did so through water and through the subsurface. The impact point lay in a coastal zone. The nearby sea evaporated in seconds, leaving a void. Surrounding water withdrew violently and returned as gigantic waves. These masses advanced hundreds of kilometers, overran beaches and forests, dragged marine animals inland, and then rebounded back toward the center, depositing immense layers of sand. At the same time, the force propagated through the rocky basement. Rock is not rigid, it simply responds more slowly. The waves traveled for minutes until they reached Hell Creek. The first pulse disoriented. The second knocked down trees and destabilized moving animals. The third transformed the environment. The lake where the ankylosaur stood began to slosh. The water did not vibrate, it moved. Each swing gained energy. The basin could not contain it. A wave rose, scraped the bottom and stirred ancient sediments. That place had been an inland sea millions of years earlier. Fossil shells were exposed. The water spilled out of the lake and surged toward the shore. The ankylosaur was struck head-on. Its heavy, ungainly body was pushed, rolled and slammed against trunks. It tried to brace itself. It could not. It was carried away with soil, plants and debris. When the water retreated, it was left stranded on a sandbank. It managed to stand, but pain in a hind leg was immediate. Something was broken. Even so, it could move slowly, supported on 3 limbs. The landscape had changed. Entire trees lay on the ground. The sun appeared red, low, filtered through particles in the air. It did not feel cold. The environment was warmer than normal. That heat would not fade. The impact did not end with the collision. Fragments of the object and of the Earth's crust were hurled into the atmosphere. Dust, pulverized rock, altered minerals, and glassy spherules rose and began to fall. The quantity was immense. Thousands of cubic kilometers of material remained suspended. Gases such as carbon dioxide and sulfur compounds were released in colossal volumes. The atmosphere began to change immediately. Almost an hour later, particles began to fall in Hell Creek. At first they were imperceptible, then small impacts could be heard. They did not pierce. They were not lethal projectiles. The problem was the heat. Each fragment heated as it scraped through the air. Ambient temperature rose. Animals capable of digging hid. Those that lived in water sank. Birds and small dinosaurs sought cavities. Fires began on the forest floor. Flames spread. There was not enough refuge. The ankylosaur entered a backwater, dug its feet into the mud and kept its head above the surface. It could not fully submerge. It could not flee. A tyrannosaur ran past, engulfed in fire. The heat continued to rise. Day turned into a premature night. Far away in the ocean, a plesiosaur breathed at the surface. Its life had always passed between water and air. It fed on invertebrates along the coastal bottom, using small, dense teeth to filter organisms from sediment. After feeding, it surfaced to breathe and observe. The sun also appeared red. Small impacts began to strike the sea. Something hit its head, then its back. It was not an attack. It dove to avoid it. Underwater, the immediate danger lessened. But what was falling was not the greatest problem. In the days that followed, sunlight was blocked, dust and aerosols darkened the sky, plants stopped growing, many died. Photosynthesis collapsed. Herbivores were left without food. Large bodies required constant energy. They did not get it. One by one they sickened and died. Carnivores followed. Ecosystems unraveled. There was no final explosion. There were weeks of hunger, months of cold, years of scarcity. Non-avian dinosaurs disappeared. No viable populations remained. Large marine reptiles went extinct. Pterosaurs did not survive. Sauropods did not return. Ceratopsians, hadrosaurs, ankylosaurs, tyrannosaurs all came to an end. Some small lineages endured. Birds, mammals, unobtrusive reptiles. The Earth kept turning. The period changed. The previous world did not return. The extinction was not an instant. It was a process. And when it ended, an era that had lasted more than 100 million years was completely over. 66 million years after the end of the Cretaceous, the boundary between two epochs is still recorded in rock. A thin, continuous layer marks the exact point at which an entire world ceased to exist. Below that line appear the remains of ecosystems dominated by non-avian dinosaurs. Above it, they are no longer found. The transition is clear and repeats in different places across the planet. An external event altered the atmosphere, interrupted sunlight, and dismantled ecological networks that had functioned for more than 100 million years, leaving a definitive rupture in the history of life on Earth.